They captured a silent human ship, then its crew finally woke up. Part 1. The scout ship Vethral's Eye * drifted at the edge of the Kal expanse, far from any star, where the black of space was thick and cold. Captain Skarn Durvek stood on the narrow bridge, his 4 eyes moving slowly over the sensor screen. His crew, all Vren, were quiet. They had been on patrol for 11 days and nothing had happened. Nothing ever happened out here. Then the sensor screen blinked. "Captain," said Ensa, the young sensor officer, her voice was tight. "I have something. A large object 300,000 spans away. Metal, big." Skarn moved closer. "Ship or debris?" "Ship shape, but it is not moving. No engine heat, no power signal." "Nothing." Skarn's lower jaw clicked, a habit he had when he was thinking hard. In all his years serving the Vren Dominion, he had seen wrecks before. Old war hulks, drifting husks left over from battles fought decades ago. But something about this felt different. The shape on the screen was too clean, too whole. "Bring us closer," he said. "Slow, weapons ready, but do not fire unless I say so." The Vethral's Eye crept forward through the dark. Minutes passed. Then the shape on the screen grew clearer and the whole bridge went silent. It was a ship, a huge one, far larger than the scout vessel, larger than most Vren cruisers. Its hull was long and smooth, dark gray, with no lights showing anywhere along its length. No blinking beacons, no exhaust glow. No hum of engines that their instruments could detect. It looked dead. It looked like it had been floating there, silent, for a very long time. "Species markings?" Skarn asked. Ensa tapped her console, running the shape and hull patterns through the database. It took a moment. Then her eyes widened. "Human," she said. "Captain, this is a human ship." The word human made 2 of the other officers turn their heads. Everyone on the bridge knew the stories. The Vren Dominion did not have direct contact with humans, not for many cycles, but every species along the trade lanes told the same tale. A species that fought too hard, that never seemed to know when to stop, that had vanished from most star charts after a war so terrible that even the species who won it did not like to talk about it. Some said humans were extinct now. Others said they had gone quiet on purpose, hiding somewhere, healing. Skarn had heard both stories. He had never expected to find a piece of one floating silently in the dark like this. "Life signs?" he asked. Ensa's fingers moved fast over her controls. "Scanning, I am getting faint readings. Very faint, like heartbeats, but slow, very slow. I think there might be humans on board. Alive but barely. Weapons? None active, no shields, no power to weapon systems at all as far as I can tell. Captain, this ship looks completely shut down, like it has been asleep for a long time." Skarn looked at the shape on the screen for a long moment. A silent human warship, sitting dead in space, with faint signs of life still flickering somewhere deep inside it. This was not something a scout captain saw every day. This was the kind of find that could make a career, or end one if handled badly. "Send a message to Fleet Command," he said. "Tell them what we found. Tell them we are going to attempt to board." "Captain, is that wise?" asked his second officer, a cautious Vren named Belor. "If it is truly a human ship, even a dead one, it could be dangerous. Human hulls are known to be tough. Their weapons are not active," Skarn said. "You said it yourself, Ensa. No power to weapons, no shields. This ship cannot hurt us. And if there are humans alive on board, barely alive, then Fleet Command will want to know everything about them. This could be the greatest discovery of my career, of any of our careers." Belor said nothing more, though his eyes stayed narrow with worry. They spent the next several hours moving the Vethral's Eye * into a matching orbit beside the great silent hull. Up close, the human ship was even more impressive than the sensors had shown. It stretched long and dark, its surface covered in strange markings the Vren could not read, and rows of small round windows that showed no light behind them at all. It truly did look dead, a tomb floating in the void. Skarn chose 6 of his best crew to go with him on the boarding party, all wearing full-pressure suits, all carrying stun weapons in case the readings were wrong and something on board was still able to fight. Belor wanted to stay behind on the bridge, in case anything went wrong, and Skarn allowed it. They crossed the gap between the two ships in a small transport pod. As they neared the human hull, Skarn noticed something strange. Even though the ship showed no power, a section near what looked like a side airlock seemed to shimmer faintly, as if some old system was still working just enough to keep a door sealed shut against the vacuum. "Cutting through," said Reth, the engineer of the boarding party, once they had docked the pod against the airlock. He worked with a small torch, slicing carefully through the outer seal. It took longer than expected. The metal was thick, tougher than anything they had ever cut through before. Finally, the outer door opened, and the boarding party floated into a dark chamber. Their suit lights swept over metal walls, thick and plain, built for strength rather than beauty. The inner door of the airlock was closed, but unlike the outer one, it still had a faint red light glowing beside it, a small sign of power somewhere in this dead ship. "There is still some kind of system running," Reth said, surprised. "Very small, barely anything, but it is there." Skarn placed his hand near the door. "Can you open it?" Reth worked at a panel beside the door for a few minutes, and slowly, with a groan that echoed through the metal, the inner door slid open. Beyond it was a long corridor, dark, silent, cold. The boarding party's suit lights cut through the blackness in narrow beams. Skarn led them forward, one careful step at a time, his stun weapon held ready in his hand. The corridor was empty. No bodies, no wreckage, no signs of a fight. Everything looked orderly, as if the crew had simply gone to sleep one day and never woken up. They passed doors marked with symbols they could not read, storage rooms, what looked like a small kitchen area, all still and silent. "This does not look like a wreck from battle," Skarn said quietly, more to himself than to his crew. "This looks like a ship that was put to sleep on purpose." They continued deeper, until they reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. Skarn's suit lights swept across row after row of tall metal pods, each one large enough to hold a single body, each one glowing faintly with a soft blue light along its edges. There were dozens of them, lined up in neat rows that stretched far back into the shadows. Ensa's voice came through the comm from the Vethral's eye. "Captain, the life signs I detected before, they are coming from that chamber. Many of them, all faint, all slow." Skarn moved closer to the nearest pod. Through a small window of frosted glass, he could just make out a shape inside. A human, still and quiet, eyes closed, as if in a deep sleep. The being's chest rose and fell so slowly that at first Skarn thought it was not breathing at all. "They are sleeping," he said. "All of them. This whole ship is full of sleeping humans." Belor's voice crackled over the comm, tense. "Captain, I do not like this. A whole ship of sleeping soldiers is not a wreck. It is a trap waiting to happen, or a weapon waiting to wake up." "Or," Skarn said, "it is the greatest opportunity the Dominion has ever had. Living humans, not stories, not rumors. Real, actual humans that we can study, that we can question, that we can learn from. Do you understand what this means, Belor? No one has had contact with living humans in generations." He looked around the chamber at the endless rows of glowing pods, and a slow, careful excitement began to build in his chest. This was not a wreck to be salvaged for scrap metal. This was a prize beyond anything he had imagined finding out here in the empty dark. "Get me a full count," Skarn ordered. "How many pods? How many are still showing life signs? And find the ship's main systems, whatever is keeping this power running, however small it is. I want to know if we can tow this whole thing back to Cathara Spire without waking anyone up." The boarding party spread out carefully through the sleeping ship, counting pods, mapping corridors, careful never to touch anything that looked important without Reth checking it first. It took hours. In the end, they counted over 400 pods, and nearly all of them still showed faint, slow signs of life. 400 sleeping humans. A ship built for war, its crew locked in some kind of long sleep, drifting silent and unseen at the edge of Vren space. Skarn sent his full report back to Fleet Command that night, and the answer came faster than he expected. A tow fleet was being sent. The ship, and everyone in it was to be brought to Cathara Spire, the Dominion's largest research station, for full study. Skarn himself was named commander of the operation, a mark of great honor. As the tow ships arrived 2 days later and began to attach heavy cables to the silent human hull, Skarn stood on the bridge of the asterisk Vethral's Eye and watched the great dark shape begin to move, slowly, pulled along by Vren engines toward a future none of its sleeping crew could have chosen for themselves. Belor stood beside him, still uneasy. "You are proud of this," he said. "I am," Skarn admitted. "This will be remembered, the day the Dominion captured a human ship." Belor watched the great silent hull drift forward on the screen, its endless dark windows like closed eyes. "Let us hope," he said quietly, "that it stays as silent as it is now, all the way to Cathara Spire." Skarn did not answer. He was already thinking of the questions he would ask, when the sleeping crew finally woke up. He did not yet know how long that would take, or what it would mean for his people when it happened. For now, the ship moved on through the dark, silent and unknowing, carrying its 400 sleeping souls toward a station full of Vren scientists who thought they had captured a treasure. None of them yet understood what they had truly found. Cathara Spire hung in orbit above a gray, cloud-covered world, a massive station built from dozens of connected rings and towers, home to thousands of Vren scientists, soldiers, and workers. It was the pride of the Dominion's research fleet, the place where captured technology from a dozen species had been taken apart, studied, and understood. Nothing that arrived at Cathara Spire had ever been too strange or too dangerous to figure out. Or so the Vren believed, until the human ship arrived. The tow fleet brought the great silent hull into a massive docking bay built specially to hold it, a bay so large that the ship still looked small compared to the open space around it, even though it dwarfed every Vren vessel nearby. Thick clamps locked around its hull. Engineers swarmed over its outer surface in small work pods, scanning every inch, mapping every seam and panel. Dr. Ida Vell had never seen anything like it. She was young for a lead researcher, barely past her training cycles, but her sharp mind and careful work had earned her a place on the human ship project almost as soon as it was announced. Standing now in the observation deck above the docking bay, looking down at the endless dark hull below, she felt something she rarely felt in her work, a small, nervous thrill. "It is beautiful," she said quietly. Beside her, Director Hose Kaller, the older Vren in charge of the whole project, made a low sound of disagreement. "It is a weapon," he said. "Do not let its stillness fool you, Dr. Vell. 400 soldiers sleep inside that hull. We would do well to remember that every single day we work on this project." "I have not forgotten," Ida said. "But it has been silent and still for 2 full days since it arrived. The sleep systems keeping the crew unconscious appear stable. Whatever put them into this state, it does not seem to be reacting to us at all." "Good," Ho said. "Let us keep it that way for as long as possible. The longer they sleep, the more we learn before we must deal with them awake." The research teams worked around the clock. Engineers studied the outer hull plating, amazed at its strength. Tests showed it could survive impacts that would have torn through a Vren cruiser's armor without leaving more than a scratch. Weapons specialists examined the ship's silent gun ports, trying to guess at the size and power of whatever weapons systems lay dormant within. And deep inside the ship, in the great chamber full of glowing pods, biologists and doctors like Ida worked carefully around the sleeping humans, taking scans, running tests, trying to understand the strange technology that kept 400 living beings suspended in such deep, slow sleep. Ida spent most of her time in that chamber. She found herself drawn to it, to the quiet rows of glowing pods and the still faces behind the frosted glass. Up close, the humans did not look like monsters or war machines. They looked simply like people, sleeping. Some had lines on their faces that spoke of age and years of hard work. Others looked young. One pod held a human who Ida guessed, from the softness of its features, might have been barely more than a child by human standards, though she could not be sure. "They do not look like conquerors," she said one day to her assistant, a nervous young Vren named Toth. They do not need to look like conquerors, Toth answered. The stories say they simply do not stop fighting once they start. It does not matter what they look like while sleeping. Ida said nothing, but she kept looking at the still faces behind the glass, wondering what kind of beings they truly were. The ship's main computer system proved to be the hardest puzzle of all. It was not shut down completely, as the boarding party had first thought. It was running on the lowest possible power, just enough to keep the pods working and a handful of other critical systems alive. The Vren engineers could not access most of its files. The systems were locked behind codes and protections they had never encountered before, layers of security built by minds that thought about war and safety very differently than the Vren did. It is like trying to open a locked box with our fingernails, one engineer complained to Director Hose after another failed attempt to break into the ship's data core. Every time we try a new approach, the system seems to notice and something changes. New locks appear where there were none before. Hose frowned deeply at this report. Are you saying the system is reacting to us? I am saying it might be, the engineer admitted. It could simply be built that way to defend itself no matter what, or it could mean something in the ship is more aware than we thought. This news troubled Director Hose more than he let show. He ordered the teams to slow their attempts at breaking into the main computer, worried that pushing too hard might trigger something dangerous. Instead, he told them to focus on studying the ship's physical structure and the sleeping crew themselves, gathering as much information as they safely could. Ida, for her part, noticed something the other scientists had not paid much attention to. Each day, when she took her readings of the sleeping crew, the numbers shifted just slightly. Heart rates that had been perfectly steady for 2 days began to show tiny, irregular changes. Brain activity, once nearly flat, showed small flickers here and there like sparks in the dark. She brought this to Director Hose on the 5th day since the ship's arrival. It could be nothing, she admitted. Small fluctuations, well within what we might expect from any long-sleeping biological system, but I wanted you to know. The sleep state does not appear to be as fixed and stable as we first believed. Hose studied her data carefully, his 4 eyes narrowing. Could this sleep state be ending on its own? I do not know, Ida said honestly. We do not fully understand how their sleep systems work. It is possible the pods are simply reacting to being moved, to changes in temperature or pressure during transport and docking. Or it is possible something else is happening. I would recommend increased monitoring and perhaps caution around the crew chamber. Increase security around the pod chamber, Hose ordered immediately. Double the guards, and Dr. Vell, I want hourly reports on the crew's condition from now on, not daily ones. The days that followed were tense ones at Cathara Spire. Guards were posted at every entrance to the great chamber of sleeping pods, armed and alert, though most of them found the duty strange and unsettling, standing watch over 400 motionless bodies that never moved, never made a sound, yet somehow felt as if they might at any moment. Ida continued her work, watching the small changes in the readings grow slowly day by day. The heart rates rose just slightly. The brain activity flickered more often, longer each time. Whatever deep sleep had held these humans still and quiet for who knew how long, it was beginning very slowly to loosen its grip. She tried to warn Director Hose again, more urgently this time on the 9th day. The changes are accelerating, she told him, showing him charts that climbed steadily upward. If this pattern continues, I believe some of the crew could begin to wake within days, perhaps sooner. Director Hose considered this for a long moment, staring at the charts, at the great chamber shown on a monitor screen beside them, rows of glowing pods stretching into the distance. Fleet Command will want full study completed before anything wakes, he finally said. They have been very clear about that. We are to learn everything we can from a fully controlled, fully sleeping subject before we ever consider allowing conscious contact. With respect, Director, Ida said carefully, I am not certain we have the ability to prevent it if their bodies are beginning to wake on their own. Whatever put them to sleep may not be ours to control. Ho's expression darkened. Then we prepare for what may come. I want restraint systems installed around each pod just in case. I want additional armed guards. And I want a full negotiation and containment plan ready within 2 days, in the event that any of them wake before we are ready. Ida nodded and returned to her work, though a small worry sat heavy in her chest. She had spent 9 days now looking into the still, sleeping faces of 400 humans, and something about the way their readings climbed, slowly but steadily, felt less like an accident and more like a countdown. That night, working alone in the great chamber long after her shift should have ended, Ida stood beside one particular pod, the one holding the human who looked, by her best guess, closest to Vren's standards of a leader, a strong-jawed figure with short gray hair and lines around the eyes that suggested years of command. The name stitched into the fabric near the pod's edge, in human script none of them could read, meant nothing to her yet. But she found herself watching that still, sleeping face for a long time. "What are you dreaming about?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone, "while we study everything about you, not knowing what you truly are." Behind the frosted glass, the human's eyelids did not move. But deep in the ship's silent computer core, far below where Ida stood, a single small light blinked on, then off, then on again, slow and steady like a heartbeat quietly returning to life. The countdown Ida feared had already begun. Cathara Spire, for all its power and pride, had no way of knowing just how little time it truly had left before everything changed. Colonel Mara Voss woke up the way she always did after a long sleep cycle, slowly, one sense at a time, her mind climbing up out of darkness toward the dim awareness of her own body. First came the cold, then the strange, weak feeling in her muscles, then faintly the sound of her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. She did not open her eyes right away. Long training had taught her better than that. Instead, she lay still, listening, letting her mind catch up before her body gave anything away. Something was wrong. The last thing she remembered clearly was the order to enter deep stasis, the calm voice of the ship system counting down before the cold took her under. She remembered the reason for it, too. The ambush near the Thren corridor, their ship badly damaged, engines failing, and Captain Reyes' decision to power everything down, go dark and drift silent until rescue could find them, rather than risk drawing more enemy fire with active systems. Deep sleep for the crew, to save air, to save power, to save lives, for as long as it took. That had been the plan, silent running, drifting, waiting. But something about the air around her now felt different. The faint hum she could hear was not the sound of her own ship systems. It was something else, unfamiliar, coming from somewhere close by, not from the pod itself. Slowly, carefully, Mara opened her eyes. Through the frosted glass of her pod, she saw shapes moving in the dim light beyond, tall, narrow figures, with strange, jointed limbs and heads that did not look like any species she recognized from her training. Not rescue, not her own people. Her heart began to pound harder, though she kept her breathing slow and even. Whoever these beings were, they had not woken her. Something else had. And if they did not yet know she was awake, that was an advantage she intended to keep for as long as possible. She let her eyes move without turning her head, taking in as much as she could. The chamber outside her pod was large, lined with rows of identical pods stretching into the distance. Her crew, she realized, still sleeping around her. Near her own pod stood 2 of the strange, narrow figures, dressed in some kind of uniform, carrying devices she did not recognize but that were held in a way that suggested weapons. Guards. We've been captured, she thought grimly, ship and all. She thought back through her training, through years of missions and drills, searching for calm in the middle of the fear that wanted to rise up in her chest. Panic helped no one. Information was what she needed now. Information and time. She kept her eyes mostly closed, watching through the thinnest slits, memorizing everything she could. The guards spoke to each other in a language full of clicks and low tones, unlike anything human. Beyond them, other figures moved through the chamber, some carrying scanning devices, passing close to pods studying readouts. Scientists, researchers. Mara filed that thought away too, Whoever these people were, they seemed more interested in studying her crew than harming them outright, at least for now. That was something. That gave her room to think. Her pod's small internal display, still glowing faintly at the edge of her vision, showed something that made her heart lift slightly despite everything. A small string of numbers and symbols, human military code, still running quietly, unnoticed by whoever had captured this ship. The pod systems, at least, still answered to her. She began very slowly, without moving anything that would show on the outside, to test what she could still control. A finger, twitching slightly inside a suit sleeve that was tight around her body. A breath, timed carefully. She could feel strength slowly returning to her limbs, the last effects of the long stasis sleep fading with every passing minute. I need more time, she thought. I need to know how many of us are awake. I need to know what these things want with us. She waited. Minutes passed like hours. The guards near her pod eventually moved on, walking down the row to check on other pods further away, their attention drifting elsewhere. The scanning teams continued their slow work throughout the chamber, distracted, focused on their instruments rather than the still faces behind the glass. When she judged the moment right, Mara allowed her fingers to move more fully, reaching for the small manual release control built into every stasis pod. A control every soldier trained on for emergencies just like this one, though none of them had ever imagined using it while surrounded by an unknown enemy. The release was silent by design. That was exactly why it had been built that way. The pod's frosted glass slid back, just enough for her to breathe open air for the first time in what her internal clock told her had been many days. She did not move further yet. She simply lay still, breathing slowly, letting her strength continue to build, watching the guards and scientists through eyes now fully open, hidden by the angle of the pod and the low light of the chamber. 2 pods down, she noticed movement, a slight shift, barely visible, in the pod belonging to Sergeant Cole Briggs, one of her most reliable soldiers. His pod's glass had also slid back slightly. He was awake, too. Mara felt a fierce, quiet satisfaction. Whatever had triggered this early waking, damage to the stasis systems, some fault in whatever had been done to their ship, or simply human bodies refusing to stay down longer than their limits allowed. It seemed she was not the only one stirring. She caught Cole's eye across the distance between their pods. A small, careful nod passed between them. No words, none needed. They had trained together too many times for that. Slow, careful, wait for the right moment. Over the following hour, Mara watched 3 more pods shift slightly open nearby. Private Ashwin Rays. No relation to the captain but sharp as anyone in the unit. Corporal Denise Akoy, their communications specialist, and Sergeant Briggs, already fully alert now, his eyes open and watching everything with the same careful patience Mara herself was practicing. 4 of them awake out of 400 sleeping. It was not the whole crew, not the officers, not the captain, but it was a start. It was enough. Mara waited until the guards patrolling her section moved to the far end of the chamber, their attention pulled by some alert on a device one of them carried. Then, moving as quietly as her stiff, weakened body would allow, she pushed herself fully out of the pod. Cold air hit her skin. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, unused to bearing weight after so long a sleep, but she caught herself against the edge of the pod, breathing hard, forcing her body to remember how to stand. Around her in the dim chamber light, she could see the true scale of what surrounded them. Hundreds of pods, most still sealed, still sleeping, and beyond them, moving through the shadows, more of the strange, narrow alien figures than she could easily count. She crossed carefully to Cole's pod, staying low, using the rows of sealed pods for cover. He was already out, standing unsteadily, one hand braced against his own pod. "Report," she whispered, so quietly it was barely more than breath. "No idea how long we've been under, ma'am," Cole whispered back. "No idea where we are, but I count at least a dozen hostiles moving through this chamber, more outside probably. Weapons? None on me. Standard procedure, remember. Nothing goes into stasis armed." Mara's jaw tightened. Of course. Standard procedure, designed to keep sleeping soldiers safe from accidents during long stasis, now left them stripped of every weapon while surrounded by an unknown enemy force. She would have appreciated the irony under different circumstances. "Then we improvise," she said. "Get Rays and Akoi, quietly. We move as a team, we gather information, and we do not engage unless we have no other choice. Our first priority is understanding what we're dealing with. Our second priority is finding out if the captain and the rest of the crew are still alive and where they're being kept. Understood?" Understood. Within minutes, the four of them had gathered in the shadow of a support pillar near the edge of the pod chamber, keeping low, keeping quiet, watching the alien scientists and guards move through their work, oblivious to the fact that four fully conscious human soldiers now stood among the rows of their captured prize. Denise Akoi, ever practical, was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "They don't know we're awake," she whispered. "That's an advantage, maybe the only one we've got right now." "Then we keep it that way as long as we can," Mara said, her mind already working through the layout of the chamber, the positions of the guards, the paths that led out into the rest of whatever station or ship they now found themselves aboard. Years of training, discipline, and quiet determination settled over her like armor. They had been captured, their ship had been taken. Hundreds of their fellow soldiers still slept, unaware, at the mercy of an unknown enemy. But Mara Voss and the small handful of soldiers now standing with her in the shadows were awake, and they were far from finished. "Let's find out exactly what we're up against," she said quietly. "And then let's figure out how we take our ship back." Around them, the vast chamber of sleeping pods stretched on into the dim light, silent witnesses to the beginning of something the Vren scientists working nearby had no idea was already underway. For 2 full days, Mara Voss and her small team moved through the shadows of their own captured ship like ghosts. They learned quickly. The aliens called themselves Vren, a word Denise Akoi managed to piece together after quietly studying the patterns of their speech and the markings on their uniforms. The station attached to their ship was called Cathara Spire, a massive research base, full of scientists and soldiers who believed they had captured a harmless, sleeping prize. That misunderstanding was the only real advantage the small team had, and they used it carefully. Mara set strict rules from the start. No contact with the Vren unless absolutely necessary. No taking unnecessary risks. Every movement through the ship's corridors planned and quiet, using their own knowledge of the vessel's layout. Knowledge the Vren clearly did not fully have yet, since they were still mapping and studying everything, unsure which systems did what. That gave the small team an edge no enemy scanner could take away. On the first night, they found an unguarded maintenance corridor that ran beneath the main pod chamber, a narrow crawlspace built for engineers to access wiring and life support systems. From there, they were able to move through much of the ship's lower sections without being seen at all, learning the positions of Vren guards, the locations of their equipment, and slowly, carefully, gathering small tools and parts that might prove useful later. Cole Briggs, who had trained as a combat engineer before joining Mara's unit, found a service panel that still had partial access to some of the ship's lower systems. Systems too basic and unimportant for the Vren to have locked down yet. Through it, working quietly over several hours, he managed to reroute a small amount of power to a hidden section of the ship's short-range communication array. Not enough to send a full signal out into space, but enough, he believed, to eventually reach the sealed inner sections where the rest of the crew's pods and the captain's own stasis chamber were kept. "If we can get a message to the captain's pod," Cole explained quietly to Mara, huddled together in the dim maintenance corridor, "we might be able to trigger a manual wake sequence remotely. Bring more of the crew up, slowly, quietly, same as what happened to us." "Do it," Mara said, "but carefully. If the Vren notice a power spike in the wrong place, they'll come looking, and we lose the only advantage we've got." It took Cole almost a full day of careful, hidden work to make it happen. Mara used the time to study the Vren more closely, watching from hidden vantage points as scientists moved through the ship, taking notes, running scans, speaking in their clicking language about things the humans could only guess at. She noted uniforms, noted who seemed to give orders and who followed them, noted patrol patterns and shift changes. She noticed, too, one Vren in particular, a smaller, younger one who spent far more time near the pod chamber than any of the others, who moved slowly and carefully among the sleeping crew, who seemed, unlike most of the others, to look at the sleeping humans less like specimens and more like people. Interesting, Mara thought, filing that observation away. Might matter later, might not. On the second night, Cole's work paid off. A quiet signal pulsed through the ship's old wiring, reaching deep into the sealed inner chamber where Captain Alina Reyes and the ship's senior officers had been placed in the most protected stasis pods. Mara did not know if it had worked until, hours later, moving carefully back toward the main pod chamber, she and her team spotted new activity among the guards. Raised voices, hurried movement, alarm. Something had woken up, something the Vren had not expected. "That's our sign," Mara said. "Time to move. If the captain's awake or waking, this whole situation is about to change fast. We need to be ready." They were. What followed was not a battle in the way the Vren had trained for. There were no massed ranks of soldiers, no open firefights across long corridors. Instead, it was something far more unsettling to the Vren defenders. Small, sudden, precise strikes from soldiers who seemed to know their own ship's layout perfectly, who moved through maintenance shafts and hidden access points the Vren had barely begun to map, who struck fast, disabled guards with efficient, practiced holds rather than lethal force where possible, and vanished again before reinforcements could arrive. Director Hose Kaller, woken in the middle of the station's night cycle by an emergency alert, arrived at the command center to find chaos. Reports flooded in from every level of the docked ship, guards found unconscious, equipment damaged, entire sections suddenly losing power as unknown hands rerouted systems from within. And worse, far worse, readings from the deep pod chamber showed dozens more human stasis pods opening, one after another, faster than anyone could track. "How is this possible?" Hose demanded, staring at the chaos unfolding on his monitors. "The stasis systems were stable, we had guards posted, we had—" "Director," interrupted one of the security officers, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We believe several humans have been conscious and moving through the ship for at least a day, possibly longer, without detection." Hose felt something cold settle in his chest. A day, possibly longer, and no one noticed. "They knew the ship, Director, better than we did. They used systems and pathways we had not yet mapped." Across the station, in a smaller monitoring room near the pod chamber, Ida Vel watched the same reports with a very different feeling than fear. She had suspected something was changing, had warned Director Hose days ago about the shifting readings, about the possibility of early wakening. Now, watching the chaos unfold, she felt something almost like relief, mixed with sharp anxiety about what would come next. She left her station and moved quickly toward the pod chamber, ignoring the warnings of nearby security officers to stay back. She had to see this for herself. What she found, arriving at the chamber's edge, stopped her in place. Dozens of pods stood open now, their occupants no longer sleeping but standing, moving with quiet purpose through the chamber, some helping others still weak from long stasis, some already forming into small organized groups near the chamber's exits. At the center of it all stood a human woman, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing the same kind of uniform Ida had seen on all the sleeping crew, but standing now with an unmistakable air of command. Captain Alina Reyes had woken, and she was already taking charge. Ida's eyes met Mara Voss's for just a moment across the chamber, the young scientist who had spent so many hours studying these sleeping people, and the soldier who had spent 2 days secretly studying the ship's captors right back. Something passed between them in that brief look, something that was not quite trust, but was not quite hostility either. A recognition, perhaps, that both of them understood more than most about what was truly happening here. Then armed Vren security forces poured into the chamber from the far entrance, weapons raised, shouting orders in their clicking language, and the moment passed. Everyone down on the ground now, one of the Vren officers shouted, though of course the humans could not understand the words, only the clear intent of the raised weapons. Captain Reyes did not move to the ground. Instead, she raised both hands slowly, palms open, a universal sign even a species like the Vren could likely understand. Not surrender, but a request to pause, to talk, before anyone did something that could not be undone. "We are not here to fight you," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the tense chamber, though she had no way of knowing if any Vren present understood human speech at all. "But we will defend our people if we have to, every single one of them." The standoff held for a long, tense moment, 400 nearly awakened humans on one side, dozens of armed Vren soldiers on the other, neither side quite willing to be the one who made the first true move toward violence. It was Ida Vel, of all people, who broke the silence, stepping forward past the line of Vren soldiers despite the sharp warning from her own security officers, her hands raised in the same open gesture Captain Reyes had shown. "Wait," Ida called out, though she knew the humans could not understand her words any more than she could understand theirs. "Please, wait." She held up a small device from her research equipment, one used for basic language analysis, and activated it, hoping desperately that the weeks of half-completed translation work her team had done on fragments of human speech recovered from the ship systems would be enough to bridge even a small part of the gap between them. A halting mechanical voice emerged from the device, speaking broken but understandable human words. "We, not wish, harm, we, wish, talk." Captain Reyes's sharp eyes moved to Ida, studying her carefully, weighing the small alien scientist standing bravely between two forces on the edge of violence. "Then let's talk," Reyes said slowly, clearly, giving the device time to work through a rough translation for the Vren soldiers standing tense around them. "But your people took my ship and my crew without asking. That conversation starts with you explaining exactly why." The chamber held its breath, humans and Vren alike, caught in the fragile space between disaster and something that might just possibly become an understanding. Neither side yet knew which way it would go. The talks that followed were slow, careful, and full of tension that never fully faded, even as the words between the two sides slowly began to make sense. Director Hose Kaller arrived at the pod chamber not long after the standoff began, his own security forces still holding position, weapons lowered but not put away, facing rows of human soldiers who stood ready but calm, following Captain Reyes's lead without question. Hose took one look at the situation, at the small alien scientist standing bravely between two armed forces, at the sharp-eyed human commander who showed no fear despite being outnumbered and surrounded, and made a decision that would shape everything that followed. "Lower your weapons," he ordered his own soldiers, "all of you. Now." The Vren guards hesitated only a moment before obeying. Slowly, weapon by weapon, the tense line of armed soldiers stood down, though every one of them stayed alert, watching the humans with wary eyes. It took hours, using Ida's halting translation device and the slow, patient work of both sides trying to understand each other. But the story finally came together, piece by piece. The human ship, called the UES Meridian, had been on a mission to reinforce a struggling colony world when it was ambushed by an unknown raider force near the Thren corridor, far outside Vren territory. Badly damaged, engines failing, weapons systems crippled, Captain Reyes had made the only choice she believed could save her crew: shut everything down, go completely silent and dark, and place the entire crew into deep stasis, drifting quietly through space, hoping against hope that rescue would find them before their air and power ran out completely. Instead, a Vren scout ship had found them first, mistaking their drifting silence for an abandoned wreck, and towed the entire vessel, crew and all, back to Cathara Spire as a prize of discovery. "You didn't attack us," Reyes said slowly, once the full picture had become clear through painstaking translation. "You thought we were already gone, empty. A wreck worth studying." "That is correct," Hose admitted, his own pride clearly stung by the admission. Our scanners detected no active systems, no weapons, no shields. We believed the ship to be abandoned, its crew lost. Finding living humans aboard was unexpected. And you decided to keep studying us anyway, instead of trying to help us, instead of trying to contact our people. Hose had no good answer for that, and the silence stretched uncomfortably between them. It was Ida who finally spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. I argued that we should attempt contact sooner, she said, through the halting device. I was told Fleet Command wished for a full study first before contact. I believe now that was the wrong choice. I am sorry for the fear and confusion this has caused your people. Captain Reyes studied the young Vren scientist for a long moment, and something in her sharp expression softened, just slightly. You're the one who's been watching over my crew this whole time, aren't you? The scans, the careful monitoring, the warnings to your director about us waking up early. Ida blinked, surprised. How did you know that? One of my soldiers noticed you, Reyes said. Said you looked at us like people, not specimens. That matters. That's worth remembering when I decide how the rest of this conversation is going to go. Over the following days, as tensions slowly eased and careful cooperation began to replace fear on both sides, a fuller picture emerged of just how close everything had come to disaster. Colonel Mara Voss, once she and her small team had fully explained their 2 days of quiet movement through the ship, earned something like grudging respect from the Vren security officers who realized just how completely they had been outmaneuvered without ever knowing it was happening. 4 soldiers, one Vren security captain said, shaking his head slowly during a debriefing session, moved through our entire station for 2 full days, disabled a dozen of our guards, and rerouted our own systems against us. And not one of us noticed until it was far too late to stop it. We're trained for exactly that kind of situation, Mara said simply. Deep stasis missions always carry the risk of waking into hostile hands. We prepare for it. Your entire species prepares for it, the Vren captain said, something like unease in his voice. That is what troubles me most. Slowly, over the following weeks, the UES Meridian was repaired using a careful mix of human knowledge and Vren technology, a joint effort that neither side had expected, but that both sides found, gradually, easier than they had feared. Ida worked closely with the ship's human engineers, learning as much as she taught, her careful curiosity finally given the chance to be answered honestly rather than through hidden scans and locked data cores. Captain Reyes and Director Hose met often, working through the difficult, careful process of building something between their 2 peoples that had never existed before. Not war, not simple rescue, but the beginning of real understanding. News of the encounter spread slowly through Vren space, carried by cautious official reports and less cautious rumors alike. The story changed a little with each telling, as stories often do, but the core of it stayed the same, and it traveled far. A human ship thought dead and empty, silent and harmless, had been taken as a prize by a confident, curious species, only for its crew to wake, quietly and completely outmaneuver their captors within days, all without a single shot being fired in true anger. Some species who heard the story laughed nervously at Vren expense. Others grew more cautious than ever about any silent, drifting ship they might encounter in the future, human or otherwise. And a few, in quiet conversations across trade stations and distant colonies, began to wonder seriously, for the first time in a long while, what it might mean for the wider galaxy that humanity, after all this time, was not gone at all. Only resting, only waiting, only quiet for a while, before rising again exactly when it mattered most. On the day the UES Meridian was finally ready to depart Cathara Spire, fully repaired and fully crewed once more, Captain Reyes stood at the edge of the docking bay with Director Hose and Ida Vell, saying her final farewells before returning to the bridge. We didn't come here looking for trouble, Reyes said. We didn't come here looking for friends either. We were just trying to survive long enough for someone to find us. I suppose in the end someone did. For what it is worth, Captain, Hose said carefully, I am glad it was us who found you and not someone less willing to talk once the danger became clear. I do not know what would have happened otherwise. Neither do I, Reyes admitted, and I'd rather we never find out. Ida stepped forward, offering something small wrapped carefully in cloth, one of the many devices she had used during the long weeks of careful study and careful talking, now offered freely rather than taken by force. A gift, she said, through the same halting translator that had first bridged the gap between their two peoples. For remembering, and for what comes next, whatever that may be. Captain Reyes accepted it with a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Dr. Vell. I think you might be the reason this ended the way it did, instead of far worse. Don't ever stop looking at people like people, whatever your fleet command tells you to do instead. As the UES Meridian finally pulled away from Cathara Spire, its engines humming steadily now instead of silent and dark, Colonel Mara Voss stood beside Captain Reyes on the bridge, watching the great Vren station shrink slowly behind them on the view screen. Quite a story to bring home, Mara said quietly. It is, Reyes agreed. A ship goes silent, gets captured by a species who thinks they've found an easy prize, and wakes up to take it right back without ever needing to fight a real battle to do it. She allowed herself a small, tired smile. Command's going to have a hard time believing this one. Command's going to be proud of it, Mara said. Whole crew alive, ship recovered, and maybe, if we're lucky, the start of an actual alliance instead of another war. Captain Reyes nodded slowly, watching the stars stretch out ahead of them, the long journey home only just beginning. That would be something, she said quietly. That would be something worth all of this. Behind them, Cathara Spire continued its slow orbit, carrying within its research logs and updated reports a lesson its scientists and soldiers alike would not soon forget. That silence, in a species capable of humanity's particular kind of quiet, patient strength, was never truly the same thing as weakness. And somewhere far across the galaxy, in council chambers and command centers belonging to species who had never met a single human at all, the story continued to spread, carried from ship to ship, station to station, growing a little with each telling, the tale of the silent ship, and the crew who woke up exactly when it mattered most.